Welcome to Asian American Life. I'm Ernabel DeMello. I'm inside the Klein Gallery, where coming up, our correspondent Vivian Lee will give us a tour of their latest exhibit, Tone Check, art by contemporary Korean artists. Plus, we'll have the latest on politics, culture, and health. But first, here's a look at what's ahead. It's National Heart Month. We examine why South Asians are at a higher risk of heart disease. A look at who's who in Trump's administration. Remembering Executive Order 9066 and Japanese American incarceration. And my report on how Filipino communities are preserving their culture and language. This and more on Asian American Life.
I'm Vivian Lee. Tone Check, the skins of contemporary Korean painting, is on display here at the Klein Gallery in Manhattan. 9 artists of Korean heritage use different materials and surfaces to explore how skin is the canvas of human experience. From tattoo ink, resin, and silicone to colors that feel like a body check, each painting here ponders skin. The entire exhibit is a study of Korean identity, social norms, and changing values. The message here is, don't take your physical or metaphorical skin for granted.
It stops the inside intuitively from coming out, and it creates sort of a limitation from whatever outside information that can get in. So that idea itself is where this show starts, and how I wanted to convey this idea of Koreanness, Asianness, and skin in relation to how we treat our relationship with the outside world.
Artist Kai Oh examines that relationship by observing living creatures in urban settings where humans happen to dominate.
I wanted them to be, a little bit grotesque.
Her painting Octopus is unnerving. Oh's digital images printed on cotton silk with acrylic paint was inspired by a tank full of fish she spotted at a restaurant, each encountering the outer covering of the other.
The eyes are the most strong thing that shows the vitality and evidence that it's alive. I wanted to capture the vitality of the living creatures in the urban space, which is actually the source of the images are from the fish that was inside of the aquarium in front of the Chinese restaurant. I always see this absurdity of living creature, the hierarchy that it has.
Hierarchy, a hallmark of human civilization, is embedded in Jenny Jisun Kim's painting, Ersatz.
So the center motif of this is a tortoise and a snake entwined together.
Her design is based on a tomb mural from Korea's Three Kingdoms period 14 centuries ago. The UNESCO-recognized site features the 4 divine guardians, part of an ancient cosmology that influenced Korea. Kim has loosely copied the black tortoise guardian from the tomb mural onto linen, which is porous, like skin. Kim treats her skin like a collage of experiences. She often paints on both sides of the surface.
Paintings as marks is very important. I mean, mark as in the touches of paint and materials that are within the paintings, but also in the sense that they capture your experience, not just mine, but also yours when you're looking at it.
Marked skin showing fragility as well as resilience is front and center in Ayan John's work. Debris collected by Jasu Yang from demolition sites in South Korea is then crushed with pigment to create a new skin from destroyed material. And Claire Che's paintings of spectrophilia examine trauma, freedom, and sexual taboo.
I think it's very fun and interesting to see how these different artists are treating their surfaces, their skins, in so many different ways.
Skin was something that's very intuitive to my personal interaction with Korean artists in the past few years. And they've always given me this feeling of sometimes dealing with a very bodily element or treating the canvases as a very bodily part that they resolve conflicts on.
Tone Check, a visceral, thought-provoking exhibit, is on at Klein Gallery in Manhattan until the end of February. For Asian American Life, I'm Vivian Lee.
The leading cause of death in the U.S. is heart disease, and South Asians have a higher rate of death from heart disease than any other ethnic group. At 52 years old and in seemingly good health, a very fit and active Chetan Krishna suddenly found himself undergoing an emergency cardiac procedure.
So you're having a heart attack, we gotta go in now right away.
A shock that wasn't completely unexpected to Krishna, who has a family history of heart disease and has been receiving preventative cardiac care since he was 40.
It's one of those things that the doctors always say, to be careful about, which is what I've been careful about. So this was a surprise that it happened.
But Krishna's case is a common one, according to his physician, Dr. Rajiv Jauhar, who is chief of cardiology at North Shore University Hospital.
The prevalence of heart disease among South Asians corresponds to about 60% of all the heart disease in the world,
making South Asians the ethnic group with the highest incidence of heart disease in the world, with 4 times the risk than that of the general population.
If you look right here, we're injecting dye into the coronary artery, and you see there's a paucity of vessel here. So the dye goes where blood goes. And you see it abruptly stops right here, and that's an acute myocardial infarction. That's a heart attack.
Dr. Jauhar says although many South Asians have a genetic predisposition to heart disease, as in Krishna's case, many others have controllable contributing factors as well.
We have modifiable risk factors and non-modifiable risk factors. We can't change our parents. We can't really change our gender. We can't change our family history. But we can modify other risk factors. Diabetes, high blood pressure, smoking history, stress levels, lack of exercise, or the couch potato syndrome, so to speak. That is where I think we have a problem among South Asians.
Research has found that many of these risk factors are a result of social and cultural determinants.
We know that first-generation immigrants from anywhere in the world have definitely a higher level of stress. They're job hunting, they're sort of adapting into a new cultural environment which they're not used to. Second thing is about 50% of Indians or South Asians are vegetarian. And unfortunately, when people are vegetarian, they feel they're privy to eating anything because they're vegetarian. And so what I call this is contaminated vegetarianism. So they'll have the fried vegetables, or they'll cook the food in a lot of butter because they're vegetarian, they don't eat meat, and they feel that allows them the opportunity to eat stuff that may not be as healthy.
Additionally, a lack of health insurance among immigrants also plays a factor in deterring preventative care.
If I told you that it's okay if a woman does not get prenatal care till she delivers, you'd think I was crazy. But people with heart disease, or who are developing heart disease, or a family history of heart disease, a lot of people don't show up until they're having that angina, or having chest pain, or having a heart attack, and then it's probably a little too late.
All of these modifiable risk factors contribute to what Dr. Jauhar says is an epidemic.
I equate this to the epidemic that was TB, the epidemic that was HIV, the epidemic that was smallpox. How do we overcome it? Well, obviously medications played a huge role, but educating the community on appropriate behaviors, how to handle different situations.
To address this on a local level, Dr. Jauhar has teamed up with the American Heart Association to run the Long Island South Asian Project, which provides education to empower the community through events, lectures, and even outfitting houses of worship throughout Long Island with free defibrillators.
I cannot make your risk zero, but if you affect the modifiable risk factors, you can mitigate your risk to a manageable amount.
In Krishna's case, genetics is behind his heart condition, which is why he believes prevention and intervention is crucial.
Everyone should always get checked up and all of that. You should just know where you stand, but knowing your body and knowing when to react to it and saying, okay, I gotta go, and not denying it at that point is super critical. And then having the right doctors to, intervene at the right time is important.
For Asian American Life, I'm Susan Jun.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully...
Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th President of the United States on January 20th, but his key administration picks had been named well before the new year. His Asian American and Pacific Islander appointees include Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence, Jay Bhattacharya as Director of the National Institutes of Health, Kash Patel as FBI Director, Harmeet Dillon as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Stephen Chung as White House Communications Director, and Alex Wong as Principal Deputy National Security Advisor. Charles Tien is the director of the Asian American Studies Center and Program, as well as professor of political science at Hunter College and the Graduate Center, CUNY. He says that while representation is important, the concern is that Trump's Asian American appointees, like his appointees in general, are essentially Trump loyalists with little experience nor expertise in the areas that they are being tasked to lead.
Trump's appointments signal that he'll be focused on his white nationalist agenda. He'll be focused on lowering taxes for the wealthy and eroding the ability of our government to provide competent services as required by our Constitution and our nation's laws.
Professor Tien says the stakes are high for U.S. foreign policy toward Asia and the world economy in a second Trump administration.
Well, Trump has promised to raise tariffs on goods from China, and so we should expect that quite soon. That will result in higher prices, most likely, for American consumers. The most important issue in U.S. foreign policy and in the Asia region, I think, is how Trump will respond to the Taiwan issue. Xi Jinping has promised to deal with that issue with force within the next few years. Depending on how the Trump administration responds to that, it will have huge consequences for the global economy.
And in the United States, there are renewed fears of rising anti-Asian hate.
Trumpism and MAGA have been around now for 3 U.S. presidential election cycles. Discrimination, fear, violence, I think those are part of the American way of life. They're in the American fabric. Asian Americans have survived the Chinese Exclusion Act. They've survived Japanese American concentration camps. And so, any new anti-Asian violence that we're going to see in the next few years will be a continuation of violence that Asian Americans have experienced in the past.
Ultimately, Professor Tien sees it as some measure of progress to have more Asian Americans reflected in the president's inner circle and to have government leaders who look like the people they serve.
Well, Stephen Chung, who will be his communications director, I think it's important to have Asian American faces in the administration and in high levels of the U.S. government. Not everybody, of course, will agree with Stephen Chung's views or Trump's views. What's important is for Asian Americans to see Asian American faces in the highest levels of our government.
Kyung Yoon, Asian American Life.
Imagine your entire family being forcibly removed from your home and placed temporarily into horse stables before being transferred into concentration camps across the U.S. That's exactly what happened to more than 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. This February, we are commemorating what is arguably the most controversial and racist executive orders ever made by any U.S. president during the 20th century. With this brief history of Executive Order 9066, with Professor Paul Watanabe.
And this is my brother and my mother. I think this is at Tule Lake. He's on the board 5 days before Pearl Harbor, so he looks like he's about 3 or 4 at this time.
Professor Paul Watanabe is the director of the Institute for Asian American Studies at UMass Boston. His family was among the more than 120,000 Japanese Americans unjustly incarcerated under Executive Order 9066 during World War II.
The hostility towards the Japanese population, it did not begin with World War II. There were a long series of opposition to Japanese and Asian Americans in the United States prior to World War II.
Dr. Watanabe is referring to the history of anti-Asian policies, including the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred Chinese immigrants from entering the United States, followed by the 1924 Johnson-Reed Act, which excluded all Asian immigrants from entering the U.S.
Immigrants from all over the world coming here and making up the citizenry of the United States is the fundamental basis upon which the nation was created. Right. It was a fundamental basis until 1882, when for the first time we told a group of people, you cannot come to the United States. And we created this category of people called undocumented or illegal immigrants.
Both laws made it impossible for Asian immigrants already living in the United States to become citizens.
Asians could be immigrants, but could not become citizens of the United States. This is aliens without citizenship.
Japanese immigrants had been coming to the United States since the 1860s to work in agriculture and the railroads. By 1930, there were close to 140,000 Japanese Americans in the U.S. The vast majority were thriving in California. While Japanese Americans controlled less than 4% of farmland in 1940, they produced more than 10% of the state's crops. But all that changed. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese Imperial Army bombed Pearl Harbor and launched the U.S. into World War II, fueling anti-Japanese sentiment and violence within the United States. Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942, authorizing the forced removal of all persons deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast. Within weeks, the military forced the Watanabes from their home in Venice, California, into horse stalls at the Santa Anita Racetrack, a temporary detention center for thousands of Japanese American families rounded up before they were shipped off to what the government called relocation centers.
And they had a couple of weeks to get rid of all their possessions, only what they could carry into the camp. My mother and my father and my brother were in Manzano for the first 2 years of the war.
And they were Tule Lake.
And then they were Tule Lake from the end of the war.
It was a time of fear and uncertainty. More than 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were placed in 10 concentration camps scattered across the United States during the war. More than half were U.S. citizens, including Paul Watanabe's mother and brother, who spent the first 4 years of his life behind barbed wire.
There was no habeas corpus. There was no attempt in which any courts were able to look at individual cases. You were forced into a concentration camp, and it's only because of your fact that you were Japanese descent.
My fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race.
In 1988, Republican President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, issuing an apology and reparations to the Japanese American families placed in camps. For half a century, Japanese Americans have commemorated Executive Order 9066 on February 19th as a reminder of the intergenerational impact of forced incarceration on Japanese American families and our nation.
Not very many people stood up for the Japanese Americans, and that's a big difference between what happened to other populations today. Hopefully people stand up for populations that want to beat the similar actions that the Trump administration might want to take against individuals.
For Asian American Life, I'm Rainer Ramirez.
When I was in kindergarten, my mother got a phone call from my teacher who told her not to speak to us in our mother tongue Tagalog because she said it was confusing us in school. So as a result, I don't speak Tagalog. I understand it, but I can't speak it. And I'm sad about that. Well, today there's a movement by this generation to reconnect with our mother tongue.
And I'll tell him to do the same for you as well.
Grace Balajadia wanted to make sure her daughter Isa stayed connected with her Filipino roots. So when Isa was just 3 years old, her mom signed her up for language classes at the Filipino School of New York and New Jersey.
It was something I was missing growing up. I grew up mostly in a Caucasian neighborhood, so having something to relate to was missing for me, and I didn't want my daughter to have that same longing.
Balajadia is like many Asian Americans who grew up not learning their parents' native tongue. In fact, according to Pew Research, 2/3 of American-born Asians speak only English at home. And this, experts say, can lead to what's known as language attrition. According to research, the mother tongue can die in just 3 generations.
There was a generation where maybe our parents or grandparents had emigrated here back in the 50s and 60s, and then when they started having families of their own, they were, kind of instructed not to speak the language with their children. It might have been, something that might hinder their learning. So that was lost for a little bit. But now, as they got older and had kids of their own, there's that disconnect. There is a sense of something's lost or missing, and we need that back.
So what's the water again?
Tubig!
And river? Ilog. Ilog.
In 2008, Venessa Manzano started the path to reconnection with the Filipino School of New York and New Jersey, modeled after more ubiquitous Korean, Japanese, and Chinese heritage language schools.
Our mission is to promote Philippine language and culture through our programs and serve as a resource to the community. Right now, our main programs are our adult language program, which we're offering virtually.
The school also has a dance program, children's book readings in partnership with local libraries, and other culturally focused workshops and celebrations.
At? Ano ang tawag dito?
But the main focus is language. Language, after all, is a key part to our identity. When you can't speak the mother tongue, we might feel a sense of disconnection from our heritage, culture, and family.
너무 보고 싶었어요.
Language is the theme of Kevin Jin Kwan Kim's short film Halmeoni. In the film, we see a woman struggling to relearn Korean so she can communicate with her dying grandmother.
This film was kind of just capturing that experience that a lot of immigrants have, losing their language, and also one of my big fears, not being able to communicate with my family.
But while language can be vital to connect with our roots, Dr. Kevin Nadal, a distinguished professor at CUNY, says we can also keep the culture alive in other ways.
Communities still find a way to communicate with each other, to be connected with each other, and to feel a sense of this collective spirit with each other. Their parents and their grandparents can still teach them things like foods and dance and traditions and customs and so many different parts of that country's culture and history that can instill that sense of pride.
And that is exactly what Isa, who is now a senior in high school, is also doing. She is staying connected with her Filipino roots by practicing an ancient indigenous tradition. For the last 10 years, she has been mastering Kali, the fighting martial arts originally from the Philippines.
I feel like, especially with my generation, we sort of don't know what our identity is yet. So we're trying to find it in all these special ways, but it works out well for me because my parents and my grandparents, now they're all sort of empowering me to find my own culture. So I don't have to search all the way out for my identity because I know it's already here.
And for Manzano, who herself attended a Filipino school in Boston, she also feels empowered knowing that her native tongue and traditions are being passed down.
I mean, yeah, you're right. This is not my full-time job. This is like, if I'm stressed out, I'll gear towards doing something for a Filipino school. It's my outlet, so. Yeah.
Venessa,
yeah.
salamat.
Oh, walang anuman. Salamat din.
For Asian American Life, I'm Ernabel DeMillo. And that's our show for now. If you're in the neighborhood, you have to check out this exhibit, Tone Check, The Skins of Contemporary Korean Painting. It's only going to be up for a few more weeks. And if you want to learn more about all our stories, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to download the CUNY TV app so you could watch us on the go. I'm Ernabel DeMillo. I'll see you next time.